For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly.
You want raspberries too?
Emily, I'm good.
No, do you want me to bring you raspberries?
Shake is a thumbs up. Yes, really good, thanks.
That's why I'm eating a bowl.
Well, when you start, you want to, why don't you just...
Yeah, you want to convene and then I can...
We,
You can thank Diane. Take a heart.
I like
paper.
Or you're good?
Yep, got it.
Good evening and welcome to everyone to the special workshop, the report on the study of a diversity coordinator for the city of Oshkosh. So you all know this was a goal given to City Manager Roloff by the City Council, a 2016 goal given to him last fall. This is an informational meeting only, and by that we mean the City Manager is reporting to the Council on the study. So you're all welcome to listen. Unfortunately, turn off your cell phones, please. And but there is no participation at this point with the workshop. It's really informational from the staff to the City Council. So with that, Mr. Roloff, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report and the outline, the PowerPoint presentation is going to be on our website, so everybody's welcome to go take a look at it afterwards, so that you have some information and background about what I'm presenting to the council tonight. Just going to do a brief outline of what our presentation is going to be. I'm going to talk a little bit about just defining diversity and inclusion to kind of get everybody on the same playing field, so we know where we're at. And going to be talking about the purpose of the diversity coordinator based on the research that I've done. Want to thank many staff members, a lot of members of Mr. Fitzpatrick's staff, and Diane Moran in my office. They all did a great deal of research on analyzing different position titles. We surveyed similar positions in other communities, and we're going to report on that. And that's all in an appendix on the back side of the report that you're welcome to look at as well. It doesn't show up real well on the screen, so you won't see that tonight, but I have extra hard copies, and you're welcome. If anybody, I have 2 left, so if anybody wants to take it at the end of the presentation, you're welcome to. I had discussions with a variety of stakeholders, talk a little bit about that. The citizen survey results, there were questions in our citizen survey for this year, but we've also had some other questions in the past. And then just findings and observations, discussion of different options that are out there, and then hopefully I'll be done in enough time to give council some time for questions and discussion. So if I could get started, I found this graphic that I thought was pretty beneficial. And it shows an iceberg that shows visible and invisible diversity traits. So it's not as simple as, the color of one's skin or someone's age or anything like that. There's so many more traits that are available that are not just visible, and whether it's socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, identity, or values and beliefs, things that are not even said, they're just within you. There are so many different types of traits that exist, and I thought that this was a good, rather than me trying to define it, I thought this graphic did a very good job, and I believe Diane got this from an organization that I'll talk about in a little bit. So just gives you a rough idea of, there's a lot that you see at the top of an iceberg, but there's so much more beneath the iceberg. So that's why I like that graphic so much. As far as inclusion, I just wanted to give, give everybody a common base of discussion, a relation between 2 classes that exist when all members of the first are also members of the second. That, as I looked at things, I felt that was the best definition that we could include for inclusion. And so that's where I started from as I was putting this forward. Then I had some assistance from staff in getting the purpose of a diversity coordinator. And what we did was we took a look at a lot of different websites devoted to diversity, took a look at some job descriptions, and these are some purposes why you have a diversity coordinator. Create and improve relations across diverse populations. Address underrepresentation of diverse groups. Now those 2 right there really talk about more existing populations in your community. But this is more than just about existing populations. And that's one of the things that, because Oshkosh is still 90% white and only 10% non-white. And I'll get into more details later, but it's not just about who's here today. It's who is going to be here in the future. Who do we want to have here in the future? And why do we want to have people here in the future? So we have to address issues facing emerging populations. We've had an introduction of several ethnic groups from throughout the world that have been coming to Oshkosh. Those are more emerging populations. We may see more secondary migration of individuals who maybe have been settled in one area, but if family members, they try to, I know that from World Relief, they try to locate residents and family members together as much as possible, but there's always secondary migration. And I've seen it over the last 30 years in my career that are groups that eventually start to come together. They find out a friend or a relative is in a location and they move. Those are emerging populations, populations that may not even register on the radar screen statistically that are coming. In order to attract a more diverse population, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about that, because as workforce development becomes an issue, attracting people to our community is going to be vitally important. And we have to recognize that attracting a more diverse population is going to be very important for us. Proactively pursue diversity inclusion goals, and then also some housekeeping, internal housekeeping things. Reviewing internal practices and outreach efforts, because if you're not walking the walk, it's awfully tough to be talking about promoting diversity and inclusion if you're not acting on it yourself. Human resources obviously takes a huge role in that, but it's also business relations, that the city as an organization that contracts with people and companies for work. And it's also community relations. It's how we get along with, how we relate to our populations, however diverse they may or may not be, and getting people prepared for changes in our demographics as time goes on. So what we did was we took a look at some similar positions in other communities. And I apologize for the audience that I really didn't show up well on the map, or on the matrix. But what I did was ask staff to go out and survey a multitude of communities. And I'll reel off some of the communities just for the benefit of our audience here this evening. But what was really interesting as we started this out is I had talked with somebody, Carl Nolenberger, who's on our plan commission, is a former city manager in Duluth, Minnesota. And he said, "Oh, Mark, we have a diversity coordinator." And so I asked staff, go look for a diversity coordinator in Duluth. They don't have a diversity coordinator. After multiple attempts at diversity coordinator, it was like a bad Google search. At the end of it, Carl referred to it as a diversity coordinator, really more in modern terms, but it was not called a diversity coordinator. And it was one of these 5 titles. I can't remember which one specifically. It may have been human rights officer. But you can see how the titles of the positions have evolved over time. Community relations manager, equity outreach coordinator. There's so many different titles that have been assigned because these are positions that were maybe created 20 years ago. But they have evolved a great deal. And the responsibilities vary by community, and they continue to evolve. If you take a look at, I believe it's Appendix B in the report, there's a variety of communities, and we had probably, I'd say, 20 different job responsibilities, and we went across to about a dozen communities, primarily in the Midwest. And again, it ranged from Champaign, Illinois, with a community relations manager, Iowa City, Iowa, human rights coordinator, equity director, Lansing, Michigan, equal opportunity specialist, and then locally, equity coordinator with the city of Madison, and diversity coordinator with the city of Appleton. So you can see that it's a wide range. But the matrix, and council has it on Appendix B, what we did was we took a look at job descriptions and said if it had it in there, that's where we gave the asterisk. This probably doesn't do enough justice to it because I had an opportunity to talk to Kathy Flores. She's just leaving now as the diversity coordinator with Appleton. Kathy gave me some insight into her job. I know that she does more than what's specifically on the chart, but in order to be fair to everybody, I just looked at what the job description does. And I think the point behind that is it continues to evolve and will always continue to evolve. But some of the primary responsibilities, affirmative action, contract compliance, that's us purchasing services from outside. Who do we contract with? Community relations, a lot of training. More than once I heard individuals tell me about how important training is. Training of staff as well as training of the community. Just introducing education about diversity issues that are emerging and will be emerging in our community. And then one of the older ones has to do with fair housing investigations and enforcement. And some communities are they have full staffs and some have attorneys on staff. But those are some of the responsibilities that are out there. The diversity coordinators, a title in common and educational institutions. Assistant Vice Chancellor Carrie Butler is here today, and that's a common term in university settings, but it's but some cities have begun to adopt that term as well. Okay. So I did have discussions with a great deal of stakeholders, and I appreciate everybody who assisted me in getting some information on this. Again, I spoke with Assistant Vice Chancellor Kerry Butler, the Appleton Diversity Coordinator, the Director of Fit Oshkosh, Councilmember Peck and Clark had a listening session in diversity in February, and I did discuss this with other local business leaders. And then there's also a website that where I believe that's where we found the iceberg graphic. It's an organization called Government Alliance on Racial Equity, and this is mostly state and local government. I think it's based out of Seattle, Washington, but it's recognizing that this is an evolving issue in local governments and how it's important to take advantage of that. Finally, in terms of survey and what information I gathered, we had our citizen survey. And there was a question that we added to the survey this year. And certainly that's a question that was out there. And we also had a question that's been in every single survey since 2009. And that was about community openness and acceptance of diversity. And this dichotomy needs to be talked about, because when we asked the question, please rate Oshkosh, and it wasn't necessarily the city, it was please rate Oshkosh on community openness and acceptance to diversity, only 34%, just a smidgen over a third of our population, said that we were good or excellent for community openness and acceptance of diversity. So, and I double checked with some of our previous surveys, that number holds pretty well through the 8 years that we've done this survey. So that issue was out there, and our own residents are saying that. At the same time, and this is not uncommon with a lot of issues. I can tell you that when we've asked people about streets, they say the streets stink, but I don't want a wheel tax. The stormwater stinks, but I don't want our rates to go up. Similarly, 60% were somewhat unsupportive or not supportive of the diversity coordinator position. So there isn't always a connect between an issue that the residents themselves say is a legitimate issue and the necessary solution to it. So there is a conflict between how we're performing and a possible solution to it. I did mention this when we presented the survey back in May, that the survey profile did not match the population profile. 97% of our respondents were white, so that meant 3% were non-white, and we have, actually it was more like 2.25% were non-white, when nearly 10% of our population is non-white. So clearly there was, they were underreported in the survey. And that could have something to do with the methodology, and I mentioned that. So I think you have to always take those statistics with the limitations that they have, but at the same time, that was the same group that said only a third of us think that we're doing a really good job at community openness and acceptance of diversity. So there's a little bit of that. But I will tell you that that's not unlike anything that we've done before in other, tell us what your concerns are, how would you like to fund it? Yeah, I have concerns, but I don't want to fund it. So, some of the findings and observations. And I found this from many communities, regardless of whether they had a diversity coordinator or did not have a diversity coordinator. And some of these are somewhat repetitive, but diversity, inclusion, best practices. That's what's needed for us to compete for talent in a competitive market. A lot of these have economic-based, and there are some concerns about city getting into social issues, but a lot of these findings are more about the realities of the economy. Millennials are seeking communities with greater diversity. We know that. That's shows up so much in different surveys. Diversity inclusion needs to be part of a larger plan to attract people into the city. It's a key part of economic development and workforce development, which I've already mentioned. Diversity inclusion is not limited to geographic political borders. So it's not just about Oshkosh, it really is about greater Oshkosh. Continuing the next slide, there were some concerns about, in the citizen survey, and some feedback I got about the city's overreach in addressing a social issue. All I have to do is mention rental inspections to say social issues do tend to come up across the council's desk, and the dilemma for you is you got to decide which social issues we go at policy issues and which ones we don't. That's why you get elected. The creation of a diversity coordinator position raises concerns about financial priorities for the city. We have this discussion every single year, whether we're talking about a new position that doesn't exist or traditional positions, police, fire, snow plowing. But that financial priorities issue is always out there. And you'll hear that, I'm sure you've heard it from people who have become aware of this issue, and people who are against it going to say, well, we can't afford it. And we're trying to balance a budget. It's always going to be a challenge. Diversity continues to remain a misunderstood topic that requires more education. And it's a complex issue, and it's not limited to the city. It's a cultural issue. It's a much bigger issue than just what happens here at 215 Church Avenue. I had a discussion with a business person who was, well, why would we want to do this? And I said, and I really went back to some of the economic issues. I said, you're a business person looking for employees. Where are the employees going to come from? If we're shorthanded people-wise, we're going to reach outside of our area to attract people to the community. If people don't feel welcome here, they're going to look somewhere else. And right now, when we go through this in a market sense all the time, right now the demand is high for good employees. If we're going to attract good employees, we need to recognize that we have to attract diverse populations. I remember this, and this dates back to the 1980s when I was in California, and it was a personnel director, and he was talking about diversity, and those issues in California are very real, but they're also real here. It's just that it's not as visible here right now because our minority population is relatively small compared to, say, California. But this HR director said, this was when Idaho was a real popular place for people from California to go retire. So his question was, when it's time to retire to Idaho, who's buying your house? Because you buy your house, you sell your house in California for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you get to move to Idaho. Okay, who's buying your house? Let me tell you who's buying your house. And then this person went through a whole litany of statistics on emerging populations. That's the same statistic for us. If we want to attract people to our neighborhoods, we need to keep these things in mind. So those are the findings and observations. As far as the options, I'm not planning to get into a great deal of discussion on the different options, because typically options are more of a continuum. They're not like this one or that one. It's really more, what features do you like? We could certainly look at doing nothing, and in the report I talk about more about the downsides of doing nothing. We cannot bury our head in the sand on this issue. This is a real issue, and it's not just a matter of us competing with our fellow communities up and down I-41. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about competing with Minnesota and the Southwest and the Southeast and the East Coast. That's who we're competing with for markets, because young people can and do move. They will move. When we talk about brain drain, we're in a competition for that. So doing nothing is just not a realistic issue. The question is, do you create a diversity coordinator position? The price that Appleton is paying for their diversity coordinator position is not a great deal of money. It's probably an entry-level professional position, around $50,000 a year. I don't know all the details of the person leaving the Appleton position. I didn't see money as an issue, but if we paid similarly, it'd be about $50,000. When you add benefits and some other incidental costs, we're probably looking on along the lines of about $75,000. Again, it's a policy decision as well as a financial decision, but that gives you a rough idea of what it would cost. The city had established a Human Relations Committee, I believe it was 1989, if you take a look at the appendix, and disbanded it in 2005. I'm not sure if it was, we felt we had accomplished everything, or it was really more an issue that maybe some of these issues that are emerging today, and I always believe we're much more enlightened than we were last year or the year before. But we got rid of that committee. It was called the Human Relations Committee, very similar to some of the terms you saw in some of the older positions. We could do that, or some communities have become and create an ad hoc group to try to get a broad, diverse group, more targeted. But you could look at establishing a citizens committee and identify issues that the city wants to address. One of the values of that, I think, is because it is not just a city issue, it's also a community issue. There may be some value to that. We certainly need to take a look at some internally focused actions. While I can tell you that we're compliant with the law in terms of affirmative action and EEOC reporting, the requirements for us to comply are not really high. We meet the minimum requirements in order to comply. We don't have a great deal of outreach to minority businesses on the purchasing side of things. So that's another issue that we can take a look at. But again, while whether you agree with a diversity coordinator or don't agree with it, for whatever reason, it is going to take staff time to implement some of those internally focused actions. But certainly something to take a look at. And then finally, I threw out another idea, and it was really trying to model what we've been doing with our neighborhoods that we've been very successful with into a neighborhood plan model. And I really more offer that up as food for thought because it was kind of came to me as somewhat of an inspiration. We have done a very good job in reaching out to our neighborhoods. And the outreach, I think, can start with reaching out more to our minority communities, as small as they may be. If we're not aware of formal culture or formal organizations, there are informal organizations that exist. Whether it's through just a group of people that just know each other through friendships or churches or something like that, there's ways to reach out. And so conceptually what I was talking about is a neighborhood without borders, that we could gear programs similar to, but not exactly like our neighborhood programs. Whether it's an outreach program to encourage people to do business with the city, those types of things. Whether it's purchasing, office supplies or janitorial supplies or services. Whether it's any kind of janitorial service or a consulting services. If we don't know they exist, how can we reach out to them? So getting ourselves more aware, getting more databases available about who's out there. And the best way to get a database is to start talking to people and getting more information, reaching out to those groups, and not just from law enforcement. This is so much more than law enforcement. This is all departments reaching out on a multitude of basis. So that's the crux of my presentation. I hope I reflected the study and did some justice to it. I wanted to leave some time for council discussion. Any thoughts on where you want to go with this? And appreciate the input that council members have given me over the last few months on this topic. And get your reaction, thoughts, discussion, however you want to go, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Roloff. I'll open to the council with any questions. Carolyn?
I do have a question regarding the Human Relations Council that was established in 1989. Do we know what happened to that?
The minutes of the meeting in 2005 were, thank you very much for your service. It was, I don't want to say mission accomplished or anything like that, but it was, a lot of it was to take complaints, and there were no complaints filed. I mean, so the committee was meeting for specific purposes. I think in the 80s, a real important thing was reaching out and making sure housing discrimination wasn't happening. And shows you how fast 25 years passes, because 25 years ago, the concern was making sure that single-parent households weren't discriminated against. People don't think much about that nowadays, but that was an issue. And if you take a look at why it was created, maybe some of those things got resolved, but the definition of human relations back then and what human relations might be today, I think has evolved a great deal. So if you take a look at the ordinance from 1989, it shall address current and emerging issues and problems related to racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination. The council is to promote various outreach, educational, and programming efforts. So a forum for strengthening and promoting diversity within our community. So the word diversity was actually used, which is, for 1989, that was a fairly progressive term. But that was it. Now, it did also talk about university human relations.
Right, that was my second question. Have we discussed the possibility of the university getting involved in this? If we were to establish a committee, would they be interested? Have you reached out to them at this point?
I haven't reached out with that specific question, and without putting anybody in this room on the spot, I feel very confident the university would be very interested in working with us. I got that feeling from talking with
I would assume
people
that
at
as
the
well, but I
university.
didn't know if you had had that conversation with
Yeah.
anybody yet.
But it was interesting that that's how the wording was created. But a lot of it was discrimination in housing. It seemed to be the big thing. And as time went on, that wasn't an issue, but it's not necessarily a visible issue. Because again, you take a look at that, the graphic of the iceberg, there's a lot of things below the iceberg that don't necessarily show up, but those issues can happen, and discrimination below the line is just as possible as discrimination above the line.
One of the council meetings, I think there was a little discussion about possibly co-opting this with the school district and the county. Was there any discussion of a three-way split of a position that would do some things for the city, do some things for the county and the school district?
In some cases, some of those institutions already have an existing position, and I don't think they're interested in diluting their position because it's important for them to pursue diversity and inclusion goals. And some maybe at a greater pace or lesser pace than us, but they wanted to make sure they address those issues themselves. And I think we have to respect that opinion.
On the Human Relations Council from 1989, there's reference here to having powers and duties, but it doesn't appear that this really gave this council powers of enforceability or implementation. And it's my understanding that some of the members felt that it disbanded, if you will, because it was not accomplishing what the outset was because of the limitations. Is there any further information on that?
No, I don't have any answer to that question. I see purpose, duties, and responsibility. But, whenever you're dealing with a committee such as this, in which they're so broad in their area of interest, I think another good example is the Sustainability Board. It's not any one department, it's multiple departments, and that is often difficult. How do you have, you could find yourself at odds with one department over another. Well, we can pursue the goal for planning, but it may go against something that Public Works is doing and vice versa. And it has to get reconciled within management, within the council with policy or management with a decision on those things. That's the difficulty whenever you have a multi-discipline type of committee. It's always a challenge. At best, they can go advisory because granting them powers can often put them in conflict with one another. That's a real delicate balance, and I don't think there's any real easy answer to that.
Wouldn't it be somewhat like the Landmarks Commission? Unlike the Plan Commission, which has some power, the Landmarks doesn't have a great deal of power.
That's probably another good example. It has a lot with planning, but yeah, it's probably another good example. It's difficult. How do you give them powers when these powers are vested in so many other departments or agencies? It's really a qualitative thing, and how do you legislate good relationships? I think efforts to bring people together are probably as important as anything.
And
One of the, I guess, concerns I have with the committee was with their effectiveness would have been, if they disbanded in 2005 and one of their main focuses was fair housing codes. Fair housing codes are 30 years behind. So it just makes me question what exactly their authority was, and was it that they didn't make real recommendations, or was it that the recommendations weren't taken seriously? I don't know if you have any insight into that, but we're still 30 years behind in the area that they were set out to fix.
A lot of it has to do with complaints, and if you don't get complaints, the committee's just sitting there waiting for a complaint to come in. And when they don't, and it's not because problems don't exist. And I think sometimes the error that's made is that a committee that doesn't have something on their agenda, is it because we don't have things coming up, or people are not coming out with those issues? Zoning Board of Appeals will not have a meeting. They can have no meeting for a couple months, but they exist for a specific purpose, and when it comes up, they take care of it. But if nobody makes a complaint, it's not like let's go look for people complaining.
Right.
But at the same time, is that the most effective way to do that if all we're doing is waiting for a complaint form to get filled out? Because people are hesitant to do it because of repercussions, how they may look. I mean, there's a lot of issues that go into that. That's where the relationships getting established and built and continued is probably as vitally important as the rules that go with it. Because if nobody complains, you're making the assumption everything's okay.
Right.
And I don't think that's the case.
It may be a bit like the Urban Wildlife Committee, too, that was formed for a specific purpose. It felt its job was done and it disbanded after a few years. It wrote the policies and procedures, and that was it.
Mark, did you also, when you were looking at the different aspects of the job descriptions and the different titles, for example, did you look at whether or not human rights officers or director of civil rights had a little more authority to actually do something with information that was gathered, whereas diversity coordinator might lend itself to maybe kind of a watered down version, and that perhaps someone at a more senior point in their career who had, let's say, been around the block more. Did you look at like salaries for folks that were a little further along in that, or had a little more responsibility / authority?
A lot of questions in there.
Sorry. Kitchen sink question.
You know, when I was, if you take a look at some of the information from the cities in Iowa, there seemed to be a big focus on housing discrimination. And so, and interestingly enough, some of those positions, if you looked at the job descriptions, it talked about supervising a staff of professionals. In some cases, there were attorneys that were leading these divisions because there were legal proceedings that went into place. And I'm not sure how that necessarily went about. Were they out actively pursuing issues where people were maybe more willing to come forward with housing discrimination complaints? But clearly, if you take a look at, there's a lot of those in Iowa that had that. As opposed to, for example, Appleton's diversity coordinator is more of a qualitative human relations issue, and it seemed to start out that there were some community relations oriented positions and some housing discrimination oriented positions. And diversity coordinator is doing less of the regulatory stuff and more of the relationship building, collaboration type of efforts. I think that's the evolution of that, because it's you can regulate a lot, but if you don't have good relationships built, even the best rules in the world aren't going to be effective. So that seems to be where, as you take a look at some of the Illinois ones that from the Chicago area, community relations were the real essence of those positions. And talking with different people that are more involved today, it is about relationship building, maintaining those relationships, listening, and then hearing something that says, maybe I need to pursue that a little more. Is it something quiet in the community that maybe is just a little secret that nobody knows about, and we need to get more to the surface, those types of things. So I think there's value to those positions, that just because they don't have teeth, that's not necessarily, doesn't mean they don't have value.
It does look like, though, that like you said, a couple of the Iowa, so Sioux City and Dubuque, as well as Madison and Appleton, have developed and enforced policy and procedures, though.
Yeah, like I said, policies and procedures are more internal rather than the external housing stuff. I think it's easier to work on the internal stuff, because then it's like, okay, do you want to make a change in personnel or purchasing policy? The council has control over that versus some other external issues. Those are things, and I think it's also that issue I brought up earlier. If you don't have your own house in order, how can you sit and talk about, oh, we need to do a better job in the community if we don't have an effective affirmative action, EEOC, a proactive program on those types of things? That's, I think a lot of that is the community's recognizing they want to be more proactive in that.
Do you find it somewhat, I find it somewhat alarming and disturbing that we are pointing out the weakness in our citizen survey not being necessarily representative of our citizenry, and not just at the race level, but even it was skewed towards the 50 plus, and that doesn't necessarily represent our population as well. It just seems to me that in and of itself lends itself to support the need for this, for that outreach and engagement.
Well, it really depends. I appreciate the fact that the university class has offered to do this, and they're doing it to be as cost effective as possible. They could do a much more effective job of gathering a survey results that are absolutely 100% accurate, but it's going to take a different survey model. These are students doing this on a part-time project basis. So there are imperfections in the survey. Are they necessarily not representative? Well, when 90% of your group is white, and we got 97%, we know that we're underrepresented in certain populations. But I think the problem with the age is probably even more significant than the racial issue, because so many respondents are over age 50. I was going to say elderly, and then I caught myself because I'm one of those. But the reality is that it's not a perfect study, but that imperfect study also said that we're not doing the best job in the world on inclusion. So you got to take the good with the bad on this stuff. But I think it certainly tells us that we need to figure out ways to reach out, and this survey may not necessarily be the most effective way to do it. Because originally, when we were really doing this, we were saying, what are our budget priorities? We've grown that a lot more in the last 7 years. We've expanded it. And I'm happy about the results, even as limited as they are.
Just to point out, though, is that there is no survey that will be 100% accurate unless you survey 100% of the population. You're always using a sample size, so you're never going to be 100% accurate. That's why every survey has an error of plus or minus whatever. So
we didn't even have statistical significance on this survey, from what I recall, over several years. Is that your
No, we have statistical, Professor Nolenberger's tries to get 95% reliability.
Weren't we at 90?
We're at 94 point something every single year, so we've never gotten to that elusive 95%. And the way to do it would be to do a phone survey, which would enable us to identify a greater population. The limitations are we use our utility billing system, so we miss out on a lot of folks. That's why we also add the online feature to give folks the ability to use that as well. But I don't want to get this off track on the survey itself. The survey was just one method by which we did this. But I think it pointed out a conflict that is very common with what we've seen before, in terms of, yes, we have an issue that we'd like to address, but we don't want a position to do that because that's going to cost us money. We've had that regardless of what the issue is.
Mark, there was some discussion earlier, I think even when Mr. Stepani brought up where the position would be out of, under your office, the city manager's office, or are you looking at under human resources, or where do you feel that a position like this would be in the table organization?
If the council wanted to have this position, I didn't want to get into too many details, but I think it would have to come out of administrative services, close to Mr. Fitzpatrick or myself. It's not just about HR, it includes HR, but it would have to have the authority of my office in order for it to be effective. I think Appleton, they moved into community development, and now they started a position, so who am I to criticize them after they did create a position? But once they moved into community development, they kind of pigeonholed it, as opposed to being more broad. And that's why the other options that I talk about, they have to be broad. They have to be more encompassing, because it's not just about HR, and it's not just about internal stuff. It's about relationships, and that's all of our responsibilities. So I think it would have to have closer to the center in order for it to have some authority.
If there are no further questions, it's 10 of 6. We have a council meeting at 6. Thank Mr. Roloff for your presentation. Those in the audience, for your, I was going to say, but participation, but for being here at council, a chance to discuss this further. So,
Ellen?
Yeah, can I, if we have thoughts on this, Mark, would you like us to just email you? How do you want us to proceed from here?
Per your direction to me at my annual review, within 30 days, I need to put this on the agenda for a follow-up discussion. And
Thank you.
Councilor Mary pointed out, how do you handle this afterwards? And that's, I think, been pretty effective. So I will be putting this on in the next meeting or two. But meanwhile, yeah, if you have anything, let me know, because I'm sure it's really encouraging to see a great turnout for a presentation. I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep. But certainly take a look at our website for the information. I have 2 copies if anyone wants to take one. I think Miles is getting interested. He might grab one. So you want one too? Okay, and I'll make sure. Miles has one, so.
and when this goes on for the council discussion, there will be a chance for audience participation.
Yes.
When it's on the council agenda, there will be a chance to speak.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We'll convene at 6 o'clock. Council chambers.
Just real quick before everybody goes, Mark,
It's in such a scramble.
I just want to point something out to the people around the table. I was listening to this online,
Everything else is on.
and it sounded like I was listening to a basketball game, because I could hear this.
Doesn't feel as bad